Welcome everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. We continue our review of the Salon article, Why the Right is So Terrified of Woke, There Are Truths It Just Can't Face. Today is part 3 on disassembling this pile of progressive narrative garbage. So let's dig into it. Quote, "Of course, it wasn't just about white privilege. That's just the most obvious aspect of the advantages that individuals or groups enjoy or do not enjoy in our society." So quick pause. They just covered all the bases. Groups and individuals enjoy or do not enjoy. In other words, every conceivable circumstance is wrapped up into that sentence, thereby negating that sentence's meaning anything. But a lot of this falls apart when you look at it for just a second. Continuing the quote, "Without having to show any particular merit, when the renewed discussion of privilege was extended to male privilege, white men, incongruously led by an obese man boy in orange makeup, sporting a spun sugar comb-over, embarked on their white men's campaign of endless grievances." This is where I want to pause because I actually have a pretty serious point to make here. Briefly put, classic Marxism relied on the envy between economic classes in an effort to create groups of people within society that had competing interests and then cause those groups to fight each other for the resources of society. That's what Marxism was. Now, setting all critiques of classic Marxism aside, in the 70s, it was fading. It was by and large played out because the real world laboratory showed the thesis was wrong. However, it is a very useful framework for someone who's trying to enact tyrannical control over society to use to gain that society. It's the age-old divide and conquer. We then saw the rise, starting in France and then eventually coming over here to America, of something we might call cultural Marxism. Really, it's the same principle, but it's applied with a different context. Instead of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, labor and capital, now it's white and black, rich and poor, male and female, gay, straight, whatever. Carve society up into a hodgepodge of interest groups. Get people to identify with their group as opposed to as an individual. And then get people to fight each other to receive rewards from society for their group or rewards for themselves based on their group identity. Doing that undermines essentially everything about the American experiment and will cause the downfall of America and the loss of all the prosperity we've enjoyed. The ironic thing is, the same people that unabashedly point out that they want Black people to stand in solidarity and fight for their rights, not as individuals, not as citizens, but as members of a power group, to compete for rights and privileges from society as a power group. As much as they want to hold up the marginalized and the oppressed, however they want to slice that up, they get really mad when people who don't typically think that way suddenly start thinking that way, but they happen to be white. Let me put it this way. If you think white supremacy is a problem, in order to be philosophically consistent, you should also think Black supremacy is a problem. In other words, one group, regardless of their identifying markers, seeking to make themselves supreme or over the other members of our society, that effort is antithetical to the American experiment. All men are created equal and receive rights from their creator, not from government. This attacks the very foundation of our entire society. And here we have it laid out. They embarked on their white men's campaign of endless grievances. Put another way, in their case, they're saying these white men are using racial identity politics for their own advantage, and that's bad. Not because it's racial politics, not because it's cultural Marxism, but because they're white. Personally, I think it's bad, regardless of what color you happen to be, regardless of what power group you happen to identify with, or for the abominable hydra that is intersectionalism, for the combination of power groups that you happen to join. Carrying on with the quote, joking aside, the privileges afforded by stereotypical or conventional good looks are undeniable. Like all other forms of privilege, they provide people with entree, a form of soft power that can corrupt one's thinking pretty quickly. Handsome boys and beautiful girls often age into vapid adults as a result of this privilege. They never had to put any effort into being accepted. White men may not be able to jump, according to stereotype, of course, but they are well positioned to fail their way up corporate and political ladders, often all the way to the top, for the ones who are tall and blandly handsome and sport Ivy League degrees. This is where I point out that it's almost impossible to disassemble this hodgepodge of political nonsense because the author is not disciplined in his thinking, and he's therefore not disciplined in his approach. He's making the case, as we've been going through in detail, discussing about how we have racial disparities in America, and that means that white people have a certain degree of privilege, and people who are white and have that privilege, when confronted with the fact that they're not successful based on their own efforts, but instead because of some immutable characteristic that they were born into, they freak out and run to the safety of a strong man who is simultaneously being ridiculed as a childish man boy in orange spun sugar comb over. So somehow he's a strong man, but he's also an imbecile. Somehow they're powerful enough to rule society, but also so childish as to not be able to confront truth and run at the first sign of this particular agenda item. That's the case he's been making. 4 paragraphs in, the privilege afforded by stereotypical or conventional good looks are undeniable. What the crap does attractiveness have to do with this conversation? Not a blessed thing. If you rated the 100 most beautiful people based on popular opinion in America, most of them are going to be people of color. Because people of color are gorgeous. You have beautiful people of every stripe and size. There are wonderful people who have the genetic gift of looking great. Fantastic, good for them. They won the lottery when it comes to their looks. The only reason I can see bringing this up is to inspire envy in someone who thinks they don't look good by making them think of someone who is white, good looking, and rich, and say that person must be bad. I happen to agree that generally speaking, when you are given unearned wealth, it turns you into vapid adults. Yeah, I give you that. That counts the same as for racial advantage, for caste advantage, for social advantage, for attractiveness advantage, for height advantage, you name it. If you have something in your life that gives you an advantage, you tend to think you earned it. You tend to think that you've reached your point in society because you're just that darn awesome. That's called pride. It used to be a sin, but now we have Pride Month. Whatever, that's a whole other conversation. The point is, being granted unearned privilege, being granted unearned wealth, does have a corrupting power on the soul. What do you think it does when you take massive wealth transfer payments in an enormous government redistribution scheme and take the wealth earned by someone else's sacrifice and give it to someone else who has not earned it? You are creating vapid adults who think they deserve something they haven't earned. The exact thing you're calling out here for attractive people, and apparently white for some reason. Sorry for the breaking continuity. Had a call I had to take. Jumping back in, one more paragraph I want to cover, and then we're going to close it. I'm going to read this paragraph, but when I do, I want you to kind of think about, what is he really trying to say? Because he uses a lot of words in a very convoluted sentence structure, lots of framing and hedging in order to end up not really outright saying anything. As with the freakout over the very suggestion that the category known as white comes with unacknowledged privilege, the cultural battle against woke strikes many combatants as an existential struggle. By the rules of the age-old game of race and caste and class privilege, they cannot allow themselves to entertain the thought that the advocates of woke might have a point. Let's just try and break that apart, because that just kind of washes over you and doesn't really mean anything. So once again, he does not give any quarter or any degree of reasonableness to his political opponents. His political opponents are freaking out over the very suggestion that the entire category known as white comes with unacknowledged privilege. So he's dissing his opponents. He's calling them emotional, turbulent. Then he says, the cultural battle against woke strikes many combatants as an existential struggle. Yes, it is, because the concept of woke implies an acceptance of progressive politics. And as we've discussed, progressive politics are built on the premise of groups competing against each other in order to extract maximum value from society. That is a Marxist outlook, and it completely undermines the very founding tenets of our country as found in the Declaration of Independence. It fundamentally states that all men are not created equal. It's saying that the founding documents are wrong. So yeah, it's an existential struggle. Is he talking about when he says the combatants, is he talking about people who support woke ideology? Do they agree it's an existential struggle? Because if he's saying that, then he's pointing out that his side knows they're seeking to enact a slow revolution. And yet, most of the time, people on the woke side say, oh no, we're not trying to break anything. We just want this one little concession. Just a little for us. However, the people who are competing against wokeness do agree it's an existential struggle. Yeah, I agree with that point. You guys are trying to destroy America. I don't like it. And then he ties that idea that we don't want wokeness to the rules of the age-old game of race and caste and class privilege, which is his way of looking at things. The left sees the world through group identity first, broadly speaking. And broadly speaking, the right sees things through individual identity. In other words, the right rejects the idea of a caste system, of a class system, of a racial preference system. And the left has not only supports that, but also puts out legislation to try and put those sort of preferences into law. See affirmative action. So he is projecting the left's desire to enact group preferential treatment onto the right that says get rid of groups, because from the left he can't conceive of a world that has individuals in it. He's conceiving of a world of competing groups, and he says this is my group and you're in your group and we're going to compete, assuming that his opponent is likewise going to say, perfect, I'm on this team, you're on the other team, let's compete. I'm standing on the other side of this conversation saying, I'm not in a group. I don't want to be identified primarily as with a group identity. I want to be treated as an individual. And I would like to treat you as an individual. That's the foundation of American society. But like they said, it's an existential struggle. They cannot allow themselves to entertain the thought that the advocates of woke might have a point. Again, he's saying his opponents are so close-minded that they can't possibly be having a rational disagreement. They can't possibly have reasoning behind why they're not accepting woke ideology. They're saying they will not allow themselves to entertain the thought, much less debate. They won't even think about it. They won't even consider what the woke have to say. Not even that they're right, but even that they might have a point. He is framing his opponents as unreasonable as possible. And he does this relentlessly through the whole article. It baffles me that this is considered serious journalism. He's basically taking this big smear brush, this big brush of tar, and just smearing it all over and just completely rubbing it all over anyone that he can apply these labels to. As an individual, judging another individual, it's really crappy rhetoric. To close out today's conversation, I want to point out one thing. I know it's a bit of a slog to get through this article. There's a lot to unpack here. However, I think it's worth it because the ideas and thoughts and rhetorical tricks that are throughout this article are found sprinkled throughout the rest of mainstream media coverage. And the reason for it is because this is leftist writing. This is writing with the rhetorical purpose of pushing forth leftist policy proposals. This author was trained to write in this way. He is attempting to persuade with this. And the reason why I can comfortably say that you will find this sort of thinking throughout most of mainstream media is pretty straightforward. If you want to understand if an institution has a bias, or more accurately, if the people within that institution have a bias, which thereby leads to bias action by the institution, because the institution is just the representative, the collective representation of the actions of the individuals. If you want to know if a media outlet has a bias, look at the people inside it. You could poll them, you could ask them, they might even tell you. Most people are pretty happy to outright explain what their political biases are. However, there is a more effective way, a more direct way to get a real understanding of where someone's bias is. Look at political donations. Follow the money. They say money talks. If you look at it, you see, because political donations are typically publicly declared, they're part of public record. If you look at political donations and you look at pretty much any mainstream media organization, I want to say it's something like 97% to 3% as far as funds donated to Democrats versus Republicans. And here's something to think about. I don't donate to Republicans because I can't stand them. I think they're horrible. I definitely don't donate to Democrats either. So I'm not even represented in that 3%. So if you have left and right, if you have Democrat and Republican, 97% here, 3% here, I'm over here, along with more than just me. I know I'm not alone in this. All this wrapped together comes down to this. Our reality that we have to face for those who identify on the right is that, by and large, every single cultural institution you can think of has either been overtly captured by the left or intimidated into compliance or silence. There is now such an overwhelming cultural advantage for leftist politics. There really is no viable alternative. There really is no viable other voice. That's a major problem. I don't have a great solution for that, other than to keep talking here. We'll see where it goes. But that bias is real. This article is an excellent example of how the left uses rhetoric to push forth its policy ideas. If you take this one article that's kind of condensed and more in your face, and you soften it and spread it out and sprinkle it, you will find these same thoughts and themes and ideas scattered throughout news, commentary, sports, social issues, you name it. Every single context in which we talk together as a society, there are elements of this rhetorical push, this rhetorical narrative. It's very effective when you control so many voices. You give your own side credibility through sheer repetition. If I hear the same thing at church that I hear at school, and then I hear it talked about at work, and then I take an HR training at work, and then I go to my bowling club, and it's Pride Night, or whatever. If you hear the same thing across multiple contexts, as a human creature, that makes you take that thing seriously, even if it's nonsense, even if it's wrong, even if it's evil. That's my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.